Imagine paying HOA dues every single month, and then being told you can't park in your own driveway because your truck looks too working class. What would you do if a single signature on a letter could turn your home into a place you tiptoe through? My name's Mason. I moved to Maple Ridge because it felt like the kind of place where front porches still meant something. On closing day, the sky was the color of a clean slate, and wind chimes tinkled from a neighbor's oak. There were kids on bikes, chalk drawings on the cul-de-sac, and that cozy hum that says, "Hey, you're gonna be all right here." Then I met Karen. Karen stood in the shade of the entrance sign, arms folded, eyes narrowed like I'd tracked mud onto a white rug. She said, "Welcome," in a tone that sounded more like a warning. She told me she ran the board, not just served on it, ran it. She had a smile that never touched her eyes, and a binder thick enough to stop a door. The binder said rules and covenants in large letters that looked like they'd been printed to shout. She handed me a copy as if it were a sacred text. "Folks do well here if they cooperate," she said. And if they read, I laughed, too loud, and said something like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." I didn't realize that this binder would become the third person at our dinner table. Our house was a storybook cottage with a stubborn roofline and a porch swing that complained in a friendly way. On move-in weekend, my sister brought a housewarming gift, a rust-red mailbox she'd painted with little wheat stalks. It looked like it belonged in a fall postcard. We bolted it right next to the front steps. Proud as heck. 2 days later, the first envelope came. A violation notice. The mailbox, apparently, did not meet community standards. Mailboxes, the letter said, must be black. Not gray. Not charcoal. Not some creative expression of autumn cheer. Black. I stood in the kitchen with the letter trembling in my hand. My wife, Lena. "Read it. Then read it again. It's a mailbox," she said. "It doesn't blast heavy metal at midnight." I called the number at the bottom. A voice answered with that clipped, cheerful tone people use when they're already annoyed. It was Karen. Of course it was. I said the letter had to be a mistake. And she told me mistakes do not leave her office. She said the architectural committee had standards. She said the rules keep property values healthy. I said, "All right. I'll paint it." I mean, what else do you even do on day 3? I painted it. Black as a tuxedo shoe. And I told myself not to be fussy. You know, part of living with neighbors is compromise. The next morning, I found a second envelope. The shade sail I'd strung over the back patio for the summer sun temporary. Beige. Quiet as a whisper, apparently needed prior approval. The letter used words like non-compliant and immediate remedy, which felt like a cop pulling me over in my own backyard. I took it down, swore under my breath, laughed it off. But not really. One by one, I started to notice signs I'd missed on day 1. Not the welcome signs. The other ones. The way people dropped their voices when they said Karen's name. The way the community Facebook page tiptoed around certain topics like it was crossing a minefield. The hush that fell over the evening air when the patrol car from the management company rolled by. Headlights sliding over lawns like a searchlight. Slow and deliberate. In late spring, Lena's dad came to stay for a spell. He's old school, served his country. Knows every bird call by heart. Walks with a cane he carved from cedar. He parked his pickup in our driveway. Not a monster truck. Just a workhorse with a bed full of lumber and garden soil. It looked like a life lived with your hands. The next morning, there was a bright envelope taped to the front door. It said the truck violated the aesthetic of the neighborhood. I could almost hear the binder snapping shut. I called Karen again. I said, "He's family. He's here for a short while. It's our driveway." She said commercial appearance vehicles are prohibited. I said, "It's not commercial." She said, "That is a subjective determination vested in the board." She said vested like a judge banging a gavel. I asked her to show me where it says that. And she said I should read the rules I'd been given. As if the words would crawl off the page and hit me with a fine. That night, I sat on the porch, with a beer turning warm in my hand, and watched my own home like it might spit me out. The air smelled like lilacs and cut grass. Somewhere. A dog barked once, and then thought better of it. Across the street, Mr. Alvarez watered his tomato plants, glancing up at me now and then with this sympathetic little nod. Like he'd seen the same movie before and didn't like how it ended. Rita, who lived 3 doors down, walked over with a pie and a conspiratorial lean. She whispered that Karen once fined a man for a flag. Not a big, loud banner. A small garden flag tucked by the steps that said welcome in watercolor letters. The board called it unauthorized signage. Rita said a retired nurse got written up for wind chimes. A teacher got cited for a bench that faced the street. There's people who believe the board wanted to squeeze every last drop of quirk out of Maple Ridge until it looked like a magazine spread nobody truly lived in. Why don't folks push back? I asked. Rita shrugged in that sad way. They do. A little. Then a lien letter shows up. Or their gate code stops working for a day. Or their appeal gets lost until, you know. People get tired. Something settled in my chest. Heavy as wet wool. I started reading. Every night after dinner. I studied the binder. I took notes, like I was prepping for an exam I hadn't signed up for. The covenants were drafted in a kind of polite threat. Friendly enough, until a sentence suddenly bristled with the teeth of legal language. I found loopholes that looked like rabbit holes. And I found lines that were so vague you could stretch them over any situation like plastic wrap. The more I read, the less the place smelled like lilacs. When early summer rolled in, the board announced an annual inspection. Karen posted a chipper update online, saying it was a chance for everyone to shine. Shine. Like we were silverware. The management company would stroll the sidewalks with clipboards, admiring the conformity. That week, neighbors trimmed their hedges until they looked like enlisted soldiers. Porch rugs disappeared. The chalk drawings on the cul-de-sac were scrubbed away by a dad muttering to himself. It looked, honestly, like fear wearing a gardening hat. On inspection day, I sat on the porch swing that squeaked with every small sway. The inspectors paced by, jotting, glancing, not waving. They paused at my mailbox and nodded, as if pleased with my repentance. At the end of the day, a list arrived. We'd been dinged for the color of our porch light. The bulb, the note said, appeared too warm. The standard was cool white. The letter explained that warm lighting casts an inconsistent hue that disturbs the visual harmony of the street. I laughed at first. Then, I didn't. I unscrewed a bulb that made evenings feel like soup and replaced it with a light that belonged in a dentist office. Lena stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and said, "This ain't living. Mass." I told her I'd handle it. I mean, what does that even mean? handle. I was simmering. In my head, I drafted speeches that always ended with applause. In real life, I bought a binder of my own. Mine said notes. And it grew teeth of its own. Then came the night of the 4th of July barbecue. We strung simple little lights across the patio. Not some carnival. Just a soft glow. Friends brought salads in chipped bowls. Kids lined up for hot dogs. And someone played oldies from a phone propped inside a cup. For a few hours, Maple Ridge sounded like a place where rules know when to hush. At dusk, a white sedan rolled to the curb. 2 men in polos stepped out. Faces set in that official blank. They told me the lights violated temporary decoration limits. Temporary. I said. They would be down by morning. They shook their heads in unison. Like synchronized swimmers of bureaucracy. The Homeowners Association doesn't measure time the way you do. One said. He actually said that. The note will be issued tonight. My stomach dropped like the end of a roller coaster you can't get off. The next morning, the fine notice arrived. It was not a friendly amount. We could appeal. The letter said, at the next board meeting. The paper smelled faintly of toner and inevitability. I showed it to Lena and said, that's it. I'm done being careful. She touched my arm the way you touch a hot pan. Quick and worried. The day of the meeting. The clubhouse smelled like coffee, burned a little too long. Folding chairs faced a long table where the board sat like a panel at a talent show. Karen at the center. To her binder, a throne. A few neighbors sat stiffly, clutching papers like life preservers. I signed in to speak. Karen called me up with a smile, so polished, it squeaked. I laid out my appeal. I spoke steady, hands calm at my sides. I said I'm not trying to make a circus out of my house. I said I painted the mailbox. I adjusted the porch light. I removed the shade sail. I said the patio lights were up for a holiday. And I took them down at dawn. I said the fine felt less like a rule and more like a punishment for existing with personality. Karen tilted her head. She said the rules don't target personality. They target non-compliance. She said words like sentiment and order. And to be honest, I felt small for a second. But then I saw Mr. Dadit. Alvarez in the back. Jaw set. And Rita with her arms tucked tight. And the teacher who'd gotten dinged for her bench. I kept on. I said the rules are being applied in a way that seems inconsistent. I said, there's people who get warnings, and others who get fines straight away. I said the truck in my driveway didn't harm anyone. The board counselor cleared his throat like a musical cue. Karen thanked me and announced the board would deliberate in private. Private. She said it like a door slamming. When they returned, she said my appeal was denied because allowing leniency would open the door. The phrase hung in the air. Absurd and heavy. Open the door to what the sound of neighbors laughing. Under soft light no one laughed. No one said a word. I walked home with my mouth tasting like pennies. That night, the envelope came with a thicker thump. Past due. Accruing. Words that make your heart jump to the back of your throat. I stood by the sink, reading and rereading until the letters swam. Lena said, quietly, that we could pay it and move on. I stared at the microwave clock and felt a stubbornness rise. A solid thing. I ain't paying to be bullied in my own house. So I started asking around. I mean quietly at first. Over hedges and across driveways. The stories poured out like a dam had cracked. A veteran whose wreath was called political. A widow whose rose trellis was labeled a structure. A couple told to hide their kid's lemonade stand. A granddad whose rail for his bad knee had to be toned down. Small things piling high until they felt like a wall. I met Tom, who lived around the corner. He had a slow grin and a toolbox van that he parked inside his garage like a contraband secret. Years back, he'd tried to run for the board and lost by a handful of proxy votes that arrived in a neat stack with identical handwriting on the envelopes. He told me, in his wry way, that some people like power because it lets them straighten things that aren't bent. We formed a little group without a name. Neighbors who'd nodded in the shadows started meeting in backyards. Phones face down. Voices low. We read the rules together like it was a book club from the Twilight Zone. We noticed patterns. Enforcement that seemed to find certain houses more often than others. Fines that escalated faster when a homeowner questioned the process. Appeals scheduled and rescheduled until folks gave up. Our notes grew thicker. We stapled them into basic packets. Not to wage war, at least not that word, but to, hold up a mirror. Then the thing happened that turned irritation into resolve. Lena's dad had a bad week with his knee and needed a little ramp over the front step. Tom and I built one out of clean lumber. Sanded smooth. Painted a calm shade so it didn't shout. It was sturdy and kind. The next day, another envelope. The ramp was a modification requiring prior approval. It disrupted the visual line of the facade. I called Karen. Voice shaking only a little. I said it is a simple safety thing. Not a gazebo. She said rules are rules. I asked if she could, for once, act like a neighbor. There was a pause long enough to hear my own breath. She said, I am acting like a neighbor. A good neighbor protects value. She said value like it was sacred and fragile. But it sounded like she really meant control. Something in me snapped. Not loud. More like a guitar string breaking mid-song. I wrote a letter, not an email. Not a comment. A letter with paper and ink. I said we intended to challenge the fine and the process. And I requested records, meeting minutes, enforcement logs, copies of architectural approvals. I said I was doing it as a homeowner who believed in fairness. And yes, I did use the phrase, good faith. I mailed it certified. When the receipt came back, I almost smiled. A week went by. 2. Instead of the records, I got a message that my request was burdensome. Burdensome. Like asking to see the bill at a restaurant you didn't choose. We reached out to more neighbors. Collected more stories. More dates. More copies of envelopes with the same phrasing. The same threat perfume. My binder started to look like a miniature mountain. Lena, patient through all of it, said, just don't lose yourself. Maz, I told her I'd be careful. I mean honestly, I was already past careful. We filed a formal petition to call a special meeting. Turns out, there's a process for sunlight if you look hard enough. We walked door to door under the soft weight of summer air, explaining in plain words that the issue wasn't whether one likes white lights or blue bulbs, but whether a board should be able to tighten the rope around ordinary life. Some folks shut their doors with that polite smile people use when they're afraid. But many signed, some with shaky hands, like they were finally naming something. At the next board meeting, the room felt different. More chairs filled, more eyes steady. Karen's smile got thinner. She said the petition had irregularities. She said the signatures were suspect. She said words like outside influence, which made me laugh. A quick breath through my nose that surprised even me. The room murmured. Tom stood up and asked a simple question: when is the last time the board denied itself anything it wanted? Karen pounded the gavel, not hard, but telling. She warned us about decorum. She said she wouldn't tolerate disruption. I raised my hand and asked for the records again. She said the request was being reviewed. She said that phrase like a lullaby, meant to put us back to sleep. But we were awake now. Rita stood and told her story about the wind chimes. Voice trembling at first, then steady as she went. Mr. Alvarez, who spoke softly, like a radio turned low, talked about the night his son tried to repaint the front door after work, and got a warning for using a light too late. A teacher held up a picture of her bench and asked the room, "Does this hurt you?" People looked at one another, eyes shining, and small nods passed between strangers like a secret handshake. Karen's cheeks flushed. She said, "Emotional appeals do not change rules." She said, if we continued, she would clear the room. She looked more like a wall than a neighbor. When the meeting ended, people lingered in little clumps, swapping phone numbers and that brave kind of small talk you do when you understand you're not alone anymore. Later that week, a new letter arrived. Heavier than usual. Not a fine. Not yet. A notice of hearing, with language stiff as starch. The board would consider additional remedies for my pattern of non-compliance. Pattern. I read the word out loud in the kitchen and felt this heat behind my eyes. I looked at Lena. She looked back with that soft steel I fell in love with. "We're not backing down," she said. "But we're not going to become them either." So I wrote another letter. Calm. Clear. I said I would attend the hearing, and I requested that it be held in the largest available room so other owners could observe as the rules allowed. I asked for the board to explain the standard used to determine which driveways offended aesthetic harmony, because it seemed to blow wherever the wind wanted. I asked them to put their definitions in plain words that a neighbor could understand. I ended with a sentence I'd practiced too many times: I believe in order, but not at the cost of community. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. In the morning, the sky looked like an unmade bed. Rain stuttered on and off. I walked to the clubhouse with my binder under my arm. My heart beat too fast, like it wanted to outrun the rest of me. When I opened the door, the room was full. Not packed, but full enough that it felt like a choice people had made. Tom gave me a nod. Rita squeezed my hand. Mr. Alvarez offered me a peppermint and a look that said, "Breathe." Karen sat at the center again, her binder immaculate, a pen poised like a small sword. She called the hearing to order. Voice level, gaze cold. She read a list of alleged violations in a rhythm that made them sound like bad habits instead of life. Mailbox, lights, shade sail, truck, ramp. She said I had demonstrated an unwillingness to adhere to standards. The words fell like stones into a pond, making ripples that reached people's faces. When it was my turn, I stood. My voice shook on the first sentence, then steadied. I said I'd complied when the requests were reasonable. I said I'd adjusted, removed, amended. I said some standards were so vague they could be used to swat anything that moved. I said the ramp was for a human being, not a display. I said, with as much respect as I could stitch into my words, that a neighborhood that punishes wind chimes and porch benches isn't raising property values. It's lowering the temperature of human life. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. The room did a small, collective exhale. Karen leaned back, eyes narrowed, and for a flicker, I thought I saw something, like doubt, but it passed. She announced the board would deliberate. People whispered. Then, a sound cut through the murmurs, the soft click of the side door opening. A woman stepped in, holding a folder. She was from the management company. I recognized her from the patrol car rides. She looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. She walked up to Karen and handed over the folder. Lips moving around. A quiet explanation. Karen flipped the folder open. Her face shifted in tiny ways that only someone who'd been watching her for months would notice. She whispered to her left and her right. Tight and quick. The board counselor cleared his throat. Then cleared it again. Louder. Like a man trying to be a foghorn. Karen called the meeting back to order. We have reviewed relevant documentation, she said. And, at this time, we are tabling a decision. Tabling. I mean, she might as well have said vapor. People looked at one another. Tom's jaw dropped. Then, reset. Rita's eyebrows climbed. Then settled. I asked, as calmly as I could. What documentation? Karen smiled, a little too wide, and said, Internal records. She adjourned without letting a single person ask a question. We walked out into the humid air, our shoes scuffing the walkway in a tired chorus. Tom muttered that tabling meant they were looking for a way to make it hurt later. Rita said maybe it meant they were nervous. Mr. Alvarez patted my shoulder and told me, in that low voice, that fear pretends to be order when it's cornered. That night, I found an unmarked envelope in our mailbox. No stamp. No return address. Inside was a photocopy of a spreadsheet. Dates. Addresses. Notes. The title at the top said, Enforcement Overview. Certain lines were highlighted. I recognized names. I recognized mine. The pattern wasn't in my imagination. Some properties were flagged with little stars in the notes column. Those properties belonged to folks who had, at one time or another, questioned the board in public. A chill ran down my back like a cold draft under the door. I stared at the page until the words blurred. Then came sharp again. I turned it over looking for a clue. A signature. A wink. Nothing. Just the evidence we'd all felt but couldn't touch. I felt an odd mix of relief and anger. Like the moments after a storm, when you're grateful, the roof held but furious, your house had to prove it. I met with the little group the next day under Tom's carport while the rain pestered the world. We spread the copy on a plastic table and leaned in. Somebody had risked something to hand this over. We talked about it in careful words. We imagined what to do next. Rita said the word recall so softly it sounded like a prayer. Tom said it louder. I didn't say anything at first. I watched the rain and listened to it tap out a rhythm on our silence. Finally, I said, we're neighbors. We are not a rebellion, but we are allowed to say when a line has been crossed. My voice, shook, but in a good way. The group looked at me with that fragile, electric hope people get when they realize the ground under them is still theirs. We drafted a notice of intent. We wrote like neighbors, not lawyers. We used plain words and left the anger between the lines. We said we wanted transparency, proportional enforcement, mercy, where rules pressed on human needs. We said we wanted a board that remembered it lived on the same street as the people it governed. We asked for a vote. We signed our names. We slid copies under doors and tucked them into mail slots. We braced ourselves. And then, A truck came at dawn with a tow hook on its face, humming low and hungry, and backed into my driveway. The driver hopped out with a clipboard and a rehearsed shrug. He said he'd been authorized. The ramp was still in place. Lena's dad, bleary and confused, stood behind the screen door with his cane planted like a flag. The tow guy said he was just doing his job. I looked down at the sheet on his clipboard and saw the authorization line. It carried the scrawl of a hand I'd learned like a signature on my own irritation. Karen's. My hands went cold. My voice didn't. I told the driver there was no violation that permitted towing without notice for a vehicle on private property that was not inoperative or abandoned. My words sounded strange even to me, like I'd swallowed a rule book and it had started speaking. The driver blinked. He scratched his neck. He made a few calls, complaining into the phone. He paced in little half circles under my elm tree. Finally, he climbed back into his truck, lifted the hook, and rolled away with a sorry wave. I shut the door gently, because if I didn't, I'd slam it. The house felt like a chest too tight to breathe in. Lena touched my shoulder and said, "This is not going to stop by itself." She was right. It was time for the neighborhood to decide what kind of place it wanted to be, and whether we were going to keep living like guests in our own homes. So, tell me, what would you do if your HOA tried to tow your family's truck out of your own driveway and called it protecting value? Would you pay the fines and keep your head down? Or would you stand up, even if your voice shakes? The morning after the tow truck stunt, I walked the block and felt something change in the way people looked up. It wasn't fear exactly. It was a quiet decision settling into shoulders. Mr. Alvarez waved me over with a little flick of his wrist. He had coffee in a chipped mug and a stack of old newsletters he'd saved like a pack rat with a good memory. "Look," he said, tapping dates with a careful finger. "Every time someone asks hard questions, the fines multiply." Then, the newsletter prints a reminder about order. He said order like a word he used to respect, and didn't anymore. Rita appeared with a yellow legal pad, and that pieced together courage you see at small town council meetings. Tom rolled up with a plastic tote full of clipboards, pens, and a roll of blue painter's tape, because of course Tom had a roll of blue tape ready. Even shy folks, like the teacher with the little bench, and Miss Patel, with her accountant eyes, drifted over. In under an hour, we had a plan. Not fancy. Just neighbor simple. A porch light potluck. To talk about what rules we keep, because they help. And what rules we keep, because we're scared of the people who write them. We printed flyers that said, "Bring a dish. Bring a chair. Bring your voice." Kids chalked arrows on the walkway leading to the common green. Someone strung a single line of warm bulbs from tree to tree. Yeah, I know. But we were doing this. If they find us for talking under soft light, the fine would tell its own story. Karen posted on the community page that unauthorized gatherings threaten safety. Safety. My foot. She added a line about out-of-town agitators and misinformation. Out-of-town lady. I mow my own yard. There was this little tremor in her posts now, like the edge of a paper cut. At sunset, the green filled slow, then full. Folding chairs clicked open. Casserole lids clinked. The air went buttery with garlic bread and someone's peach cobbler. People sat in clusters at first, then drifted. Humans are good at that when no one's watching from a clipboarded distance. I stepped on the stone ring and cleared my throat. Hey, neighbors. My voice caught, then found itself. I ain't a politician. I fix squeaky hinges and forget birthdays like everyone else. But I think we're living smaller than we have to. 'Cause a binder got bigger than our common sense. A laugh tumbled through the crowd. Grateful and a little scared. We need rules, I said. Trash day. Speed limits. Quiet hours, so babies sleep and night shifters rest. That's just respect. But when a ramp for an old man gets called a visual disruption, we lost the plot. I looked at the ramp builder's calluses on my own hands, and sorry had to swallow hard. Rita took over like a choir director. Okay. So, what's one thing the rules do right, she pointed. People raised hands. And we made a short list. No leaking oil puddles on the street. No blaring music at 1 in the morning. Keep lawns from becoming jungles that house snakes. Fair. And what's one thing that feels like, I dunno. Punishment for being human. Hand shot up. Wind chimes. Porch benches. Garden flags the size of a napkin. A kid's lemonade stand. Warm bulbs. Trucks that look too working class. A rail for a bad knee. We filled page after yellow page. Miss Patel, who watches money the way birds watch weather, added a quiet line item. Transparency for fines. Where they go. People nodded like, yep, there it is. Under those soft bulbs. We wrote a simple list that felt bigger than paper. We called it, half joking, the Neighbor's Bill of Rights. 10 lines. Plain English 1. Clear definitions. No aesthetic harmony catch-alls that mean whatever someone powerful wants. 2 warnings before fines, except for safety hazards. 3. Mercy, where health and mobility are concerned. 4. Equal enforcement. With logs any owner can inspect without months of runaround. 5. Freedom for small. Seasonal. Quiet joys. Porch lights. Little flags. Chalk drawings within reason. Not grudges. 6. No targeting by opinion or history. Your last meeting comment shouldn't decide your next citation. 7. Reasonable parking in your own driveway if you're not blocking anyone or operating a business. 8. Appeals that aren't just for show. 9. Open budgets and contracts with competitive bids. We pay dues, we deserve daylight. 10. Board members remember their neighbors first. When Rita read the list aloud, something rippled through the group. Relief first. Then resolve. People signed their names under the lines. These weren't revolutionaries. They were church ushers, school aides, retirees with pill organizers. Their ink trembled a little, but it was steady enough. Tom took the microphone okay. A megaphone he borrowed from the youth soccer coach. Next step, a special meeting. The docs say we can call one if enough owners sign. He looked at the crowd. We need, well, quite a few. More than a handful. So, who's in? Chairs scraped. Pens moved. The pile of signed pages grew thick as a Sunday paper. The very next morning, envelopes bloomed on doorways like fungus after rain, but only on doors of folks whose names were visible on those potluck pages. I counted. There's people who'll say coincidence. I ain't one of them. The letters sang the old song, non-compliant. Immediate. Remedy. A neighbor got cited for a bird bath. Another for planter boxes 2 inches too tall. Sorry, 2 inches too tall. According to whose tape measure, Tom walked around with a tape of his own. Measuring grass blades at corners. He grinned, but his eyes were tired. Miss Patel pulled me aside. Her voice low. I've been reading the budgets. She tapped a table of numbers like she was tuning a piano. The landscaping contract increases every year, but the bid notes are copy-pasted. The patrol costs doubled with no recorded vote. It may be nothing. It may be sloppy. Either way, owners should see. We decided to ask. Politely. Again. We sent record requests. By email. By certified mail. By hand delivery with a friendly wave. Responses trickled back like molasses. Under review. Burdensome. Pending. Weeks stretched. We organized babysitters and carpool sign-ins. We knocked on doors and found folks who'd been quiet for years because no one had asked them to talk. Karen escalated. The newsletter arrived with a president's corner that scolded a small faction for seeking to undermine order. It sprinkled in warnings about dangerous precedent and depressed values. It said, without saying, that bad things would happen if people like us dragged our heels. You could hear the gavel hiding between the lines. Lena and I argued in whispers over dishes that night. She said she was scared of the word lean. The syllable is so small, but it thuds. I said I was scared of living like a guest in my own house. We sat back to back on the couch for a minute, stubborn as toddlers. Then her hand found mine like a homing pigeon. Okay, she said. We don't quit, but we don't become what we hate neither. Promise me. I promise. I said. No yelling in faces. No doxing. No nonsense. My mouth got ahead of me and added, no losing the porch swing part of us. She laughed. Wiped one eye with her sleeve. We were fine again. The petition signatures cleared the threshold. We delivered them with witnesses and phones recording. 'Cause, look, the doc said, deliver to the office. And we've learned documents have a way of walking. Karen accepted the stack with a smile that could slice an apple. She announced a special meeting would be scheduled in due course. We asked for a date. She said the board would select one. We asked for a room large enough for owners. She said the clubhouse would suffice. We asked for an independent ballot counter. She said the board, of course, would count. 2 weeks later, a notice appeared at dusk on the website, meeting to be held the following Monday at 6 in the evening sharp. No email, no mailers. A quiet post when folks were making dinner. Rita screenshotted it and blasted the group text like she'd pulled a fire alarm. We printed flyers again and, yes, chalked arrows again. We called folks who didn't do internet. We were done being politely surprised. That Monday, the sun hung heavy and hot. And the clubhouse door was, of course, locked at 5:59. A sign on the glass said, sign-in ends at 6. We could see the board at the table inside, pretending not to see us. Tom checked his watch and smiled like a man about to fix something. He ran blue painter's tape across the sidewalk and made a line. Then a second line where the sign-in table should be. We'll sign in out here, he said. Voice calm enough to pet a skittish horse. We'll timestamp. We'll video. People queued up. Names. Addresses. Unit numbers written slow. Careful. A grandmother spelled hers twice. Brow furrowed. Then winked at me like, got it. At 6:05, a property manager hustled out, flustered, and plopped a clipboard on a too small stand. We slid our outdoor sheet right beside it and kept moving. Inside, Karen banged the gavel and declared decorum twice before we'd even sat. She announced that owners with any balance whatsoever were ineligible to vote. A murmur rolled the room. Any balance. A late fee from a misapplied payment. A disputed fine miss. Patel stood, hands folded like a librarian, about to deliver bad news. The documents say, in arrears beyond a reasonable notice. Not any balance. Her voice was gentle as a cotton swab. Karen said the board had interpreted reasonable to mean, well, you can guess. The counselor cleared his throat like a lawnmower that won't start. Someone whispered, stacking the deck, and someone else shushed. And my heart hammered. And I kept my butt in the chair, 'cause I promised Lena. But I did raise my hand and ask whether the board would allow a neutral third party to observe the count. Karen said, "The board is neutral." The room made a noise I can only describe as a tired laugh with teeth. We voted by secret paper. The way humans have faced power for a long time. Folks took their time, folded the little slips like origami sorrows, and dropped them into a plastic bin that used to hold lost and found pool goggles. Then counting. Karen wanted her 2 appointees to tally behind closed doors. The room protested. Not loud, but in a rising human pitch that fills space. We proposed tables at the front. Visible hands. 1 observer from each side. After a tense huddle, the board agreed, but marked every ballot from anyone with that balanced star as provisional. It felt like watching goalposts roll down the field on wheels. Counting started. Silence got crunchy. Tom paced in slow squares. Rita whispered names into her phone, reminding folks outside to hold tight. My father-in-law sat on the aisle, cane across his knees like a baton. His eyes, wet but proud. He had put on his good shirt for this. When the first pass tally was read, my ears rang. The recall carried barely. Not by a mile. By a handful +1. The margin was small enough to fit in a bread box, and big enough to carry a neighborhood for a generation if we honored it. The room didn't cheer. It exhaled. Even people who were not on our side looked relieved that the decision belonged to more than 3 signatures at the bottom of a letter. Karen froze, then thawed into a smile that didn't have any humor in it. Given the number of provisional ballots, she said, the board declares the outcome indeterminate. We will consult counsel. A groan rolled, soft but real, before anyone could stand. The property manager, the same woman who'd handed over that internal folder at the earlier hearing, cleared her throat. Management recognizes the owner's vote, she said. Words, careful as a tightrope walker's steps. We will support a transition. Karen went rigid. Counsel shuffled papers like he might hide behind them. The gavel came down. The room scattered into clumps of murmurs and phone calls. Hugs and frowns. The next day, an email landed from the management company stating they were resigning, effective at the end of the month, citing irreconcilable differences with current board leadership. Another paper slipped under doors, Karen's letter, claiming the meeting was invalid because of procedural deficiencies. If you squinted, you could see the fight trying to keep a hand in the doorframe. We did not throw a party. We called a second meeting. This one in the church fellowship hall, where the carpet smelled like coffee and kids' crayons. We asked a retired judge who lives behind the pond to sit at the table. Just to keep things honest. We used big poster boards with plain words. And no one banged a gavel. We asked for volunteers to serve on an interim board until a proper election. Tom got nominated. So did Rita. So did Ms. Patel. The teacher declined with a soft smile and agreed to chair an appeals and courtesy committee. People clapped. Not because they had to, but because they felt like it. The interim board's first act was a 30-day freeze on aesthetic fines while they reviewed the standards. The second was amnesty for dumb stuff: bird baths, porch benches, wind chimes, things that never hurt a soul. The third was a policy, written in longhand, first at Rita's kitchen table, that said mobility and safety modifications would be pre-approved by default unless a real, not imaginary, hazard existed. The fourth, my favorite, was a commitment to rewrite the rules in plain English and deliver them door to door with cookies. Because cookies help the medicine go down. You know Karen did not vanish. She kept walking her dog at the same time every morning. Chin high, eyes sliding past us like we were store mannequins. Some folks expected a movie ending where she apologizes in a trembling voice. Life ain't a movie. One afternoon she paused on the sidewalk while my father-in-law fussed with his cane. She looked at the ramp, then at me. The dog sniffed the grass. I still believe in standards, she said. Voice small and stubborn. Me too, I said. I just think standards ought to serve people, not the other way around. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The dog sneezed. She walked on. Weeks passed. The air changed. Not huge. Just softer. Kids' chalk drawings lasted more than a day before the patrol car, now gone, couldn't run them off with a warning. A tiny lemonade stand popped up next to the mail kiosk, with cups lined up like soldiers, and a sign that said 50 cents in shaky letters. A police cruiser rolled by, slow. The officer smiled and bought two. The world did not end. Zillow did not set us on fire. Property values did not plummet into a sinkhole. Turns out, buyers, like a neighborhood that looks lived in. We learned things about each other. The guy with the loud motorcycle. He's a nurse who works nights and rides quiet at dawn because he cares. The woman who was always complaining about teens. She watches her grandson after school and worries every second like a full-time job. Mr. Alvarez grows tomatoes because his late wife loved them, sliced with salt on toast. And he keeps a plate ready every Sunday like a ritual. Rules could never tell us any of that. One evening, the interim board held a lights-on night at the Green. We hung warm bulbs with fat clothespins and passed around homemade tamales and church lady brownies. Someone played an old country song on a guitar with only 5 strings. Tom read a draft of the new standards. Voice steady. Eyes flicking up to make sure folks were nodding, not glazing over. The lines were simple, merciful, and, yeah, firm where it mattered. No peacocks on roofs. No engines revved at midnight. But also, no fines for swing benches. For pocket flags. For the glow of human warmth on a front porch. At the end, we invited questions. A hand rose Karen's. The Green held its breath. She asked whether holiday displays would be limited to certain dates. Tom said yes, with a buffer, so folks who work long shifts don't get dinged for being tired. She nodded once. Clip. As if she had secured a foothold. Maybe that was enough for now. Who slipped us that spreadsheet? Rita asked me later. Under the lights, after the crowd drifted home. The question had been sitting in her pocket like a pebble. I shook my head. Dunno. Then I did know. The management rep, the woman with the neat ponytail and the tired eyes, was loading the last folding chair into her trunk. She saw us watching and gave a small, 2-finger wave that said both, "Please don't," and "You're welcome." She drove off. Some people do the right thing and don't stick around for credit. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they're brave in a quiet way that leaves aftershocks. Summer tilted into fall. The interim became official at an election that felt almost boring in the best way. Ballots counted on cafeteria tables. Kids weaving between legs. Someone shouting out totals like numbers at a church. Bingo. The margin was larger this time. Not a landslide. Enough to stop the constant spin of arguments. We put up a corkboard in the clubhouse with minutes printed and pinned. We created office hours where you could actually talk to a human without a gavel hiding behind her smile. We learned to say no without making it sound like, get out. The ramp stayed. The bench stayed. Warm light stayed. One Saturday, I found Karen on the sidewalk when I came back from the hardware store. She stared at the new bulletin board like it insulted her. Then she pointed at a flyer we'd posted. Neighbors with Tools Volunteer Day for minor home repairs. She said, almost to herself, we used to hire out everything. Still can. I said. But sometimes, your neighbor's got a wrench and a free hour. She nodded at the flyer. Then at my bag. I need a hinge fixed, she murmured. On the laundry door. It squeals. I waited. Then grinned. I know a guy. At her place. The laundry room smelled like lavender and war. The hinge squealed like a tiny banshee. I pulled a screwdriver from my back pocket and worked it loose, adding a drop of oil. Karen stood with her dog tucked under one arm, watching like I might stage a coup from behind the dryer. When the hinge swung silent, she made a sound, half surprised, half impressed. You could have just asked. I said, not mean. Just simple, about the ramp, about the truck, about the lights. She stared at the floor tile. There's people who say, if you give an inch, you lose the yard. Maybe. I said. Or, maybe you gain a neighbor. She didn't answer. But she didn't ask me to leave either. That felt like something. Months later, the holiday season rolled in like an old friend. A handful of houses went a little wild with lights, and no letters arrived with words like non-compliant and remedy. The teacher's bench wore a red bow. Mr. Alvarez hung a wreath and sliced tomatoes for anyone who knocked. Kids raced scooters under the glow like fireflies with helmets. The sound of a tiny bell carried on the cold air, somebody's wind chime, given amnesty and a second life. On New Year's Eve, Lena and I stood on the porch, sipping cocoa. Our breath, puffy and white. My father-in-law tapped his cane on the ramp, like a thank you. The sky popped with distant fireworks, not ours. We'd agreed on simple sparklers and a quiet midnight cheer. I looked at the house like you look at an old friend who's been through a rough patch and come out softer. Not weaker. I ain't naive. Power has a way of regrouping. Standards drift if no one minds them. And yes, someone will hang a 12-foot inflatable reindeer next year, and someone will complain. We'll argue. Then we'll compromise. Then we'll bring cookies to the meeting and say the word neighbor a lot until it means something again. That's the chore and the joy of living side by side with folks you didn't get to audition. If you're still listening, if you've lived this or something like it, tell me, where's the line for you? When does keeping things nice turn into squeezing the life out of it? If your board sent a letter about your porch light, or your kid's chalk, or your dad's ramp, would you shrug and pay? Or would you, tape blue lines on the sidewalk and count ballots under warm bulbs? Anyone else had a HOA do this to you? Spring came in on a stubborn breeze and a chorus of frogs in the retention pond. The new board learned the unglamorous parts of leadership, scheduling roof cleanings without starting wars, reminding the guy at the end of the cul-de-sac that fireworks at 2 in the morning ain't freedom. It's just rude. And most boring of all, reading through contracts line by line until your eyes cross. Miss, Patel near lived at the clubhouse with spreadsheets open like maps. She found overcharges no one had questioned. Auto renewals nobody had remembered to negotiate. And one vendor that added a fuel surcharge even on weeks they never showed. She didn't accuse, that ain't her style. She just laid out numbers like seed and invited sunlight. We put out a call for competitive bids and, surprise, the costs came down without the sky falling. We started a courtesy crew, not to police, but to help folks with ladders and rakes, paint rollers, and patience. A retired electrician rewired Miss Ginny's flickering porch light. 2 teens scraped old stickers off the pool rule signs and replaced them with fresher, friendlier ones in words kids could get. The teacher painted a tiny free library, tucked under the oak, and the board approved it in about 7 minutes without drama. I mean, imagine that. Some things were still hard. A guy down the block wanted to park a boat in his yard behind a short fence. And the nearest neighbor hated it with the heat of 10 suns. We held a mini hearing right there on the grass. People spoke like adults. We found a compromise, a taller privacy screen, a limit on months, and a promise to keep the motor drip-free. No one wrote a think piece. We just sorted it. We held porch court once a month for little stuff. No gavel. A bell from the church rummage sale. Folks came with pictures and laughs and, sometimes, tears. It felt like community service crossed with bake sale. We wrote no fine warnings and offered hands before we offered tickets. And somehow this still makes me grin. Compliance improved more than when the patrol car slunk by with a clipboard. Turns out, people cooperate when they're treated like people. I bumped into Karen again at the mailbox bank. She wore big sunglasses even though the sun was shy. "I got a notice," she said, stiff as a lamppost. "For what?" She pulled a letter with the new logo and waved it like a flag. "Trash cans visible from the street." "Ah," I said. "The eternal struggle." It was windy. She muttered. "They blew. I'll help you bungee 'em." I said. "If the crew wrote you, it's a warning first anyway." She looked up sharp. "No fine. Not for a can that lost a fight with the weather." I almost laughed. But not at her. More at us. At how we'd all been living, clenched for so long, we didn't know what our faces did when they relaxed. She tucked the letter away. "Standards are only as strong as the will to enforce them," she said. "And only as decent as the people who enforce them," I added. She gave the tiniest nod. Maybe the hinge in the laundry room wasn't the only thing that got oiled. One humid afternoon, a man I didn't know rapped on my porch rail. He introduced himself as Darren, new on Maple Lane. He'd chosen this neighborhood 'cause his sister lives 3 streets over, and said folks look out for one another. He thanked me for the ramp policy. His mom would need one soon. I told him that policy ain't mine. It belongs to the Toms and Ritas and Patels, and 100 small signatures under string lights. Darren squinted at the old clubhouse, where kids were painting a banner for the spring picnic. "How'd you get from there," he waved toward our old mess. To here I thought of the tow truck, of a spreadsheet slipped into a mailbox, of the night people counted slips of paper like they were counting their own breath. We got tired of being told to hush. I said. We decided to talk louder, but kinder. And we taped down blue lines and brought cookies. He laughed. "Cookies fix everything." "Not everything," I said. "But they sure don't hurt." Late that summer, the county inspector scheduled a routine check of the neighborhood pool. Karen, who somehow still received every notification, even when not asked, posted a warning. Prepare for the worst. Fines are coming. I braced out of habit. The inspector arrived. Clipboard in hand. He walked the deck. Checked the pumps. Smiled at the posted hours plain English. Nodded at the life ring mounted within reach. And signed off with a satisfied grunt. Not a single violation. He even complimented the new "no glass" sign for being legible without yelling. We celebrated with push-up pops like kids. See, Rita whispered. We ain't falling apart. Nope, I said. We're falling into place. Then came the moment I didn't expect. At the fall festival hay bales. Hot cider. That whole Norman Rockwell thing. A box of ballots sat on the corner of a table next to the chili cook-off entries. It was for the normal election this time. Not recalls or drama. Just the old, steady rhythm of who wants to serve. People dropped their votes between spoonfuls of chili and compliments about the pumpkin bread. Civic life. Casual, as small talk. Karen walked up holding a folded ballot. She looked at the box. Then at me. Then back at the box. I don't like everything you all did, she said, as if confessing dental fears. But the porch court was smart. Thanks, I said, trying not to show the grin clawing at my face. She slipped her ballot in. And the rule draft was readable, which is more than I can say for that binder. She said binder like a dog that finally released a toy. Readable's a start, I said. She sighed. I miss control. Honest, I said. But I think we traded it for community. She watched a kid faceplant in the grass and pop up laughing. Maybe, she said, and wandered toward the pie table like a woman considering a different flavor of life. Winter came and painted the roofs with frost that lasted till mid-morning. We started a quiet tradition, a 5-minute pause at the December meeting to name things we were grateful for. It got weird the first time. People blinked and fidgeted, and someone coughed too loud. Then Mr. Alvarez said he was grateful for tomatoes that don't listen to rules. Laughter broke the ice. Rita said she was grateful for wind that sings. Miss Patel said she was grateful for budgets that balance. I said I was grateful for a ramp that creaks less than my father-in-law's knee. Even Karen, attending from the back row, lifted her hand. I'm grateful for hinges that don't squeal. The room chuckled like wind in pine needles. The last big letter I got wasn't a fine or a warning. It was a note from a neighbor who had kept to himself since we moved in. Inside was a picture his daughter drew our porch, with warm light. A little swing. A ramp like a friendly tongue. And stick figure people holding hands with giant smiles that took up half their faces. In the corner she wrote, in wobbly print, home. Kinda says it all. So I'm asking you, listening wherever you are, what's one small rule you'd keep because it helps neighbors live easier? What's one small rule you'd toss because it's just control dressing up as care? If your HOA can be a fence or a front porch, which would you choose? And if you've wrestled with a board like ours, how'd you find your way back to something that felt like home?